Okay, today we're going to talk about dividing algebraic fractions. Please make sure that you take out a sheet of loose leaf paper if you chose not to print out these notes. So to divide an algebraic fraction, the first thing that we have to keep in mind is keep, change, flip. We're going to keep the first fraction the way it is. We're going to change the division sign to a multiplication sign, and we're going to flip the second fraction. Then we're going to follow the multiplication steps, which we did the other day, which means factor all the tops, factor all the bottoms, and then reduce anything from the top with anything on the bottom. When we're done reducing, we multiply across. Once again, don't forget if the factors are reversed with a negative, they reduce to -1. And here's our example. If I have an x minus 2 over a 2 minus x, it reduces to -1, and technically it's -1 over 1. So if we look at the first example, it says divide. So what that means is we are going to keep the first fraction. So we're going to write x squared minus x over 5x. We're going to change the division to multiplication, and we're going to flip the second fraction upside down. Now I have a multiplication problem. If I look at the first numerator, it's a greatest common factor. If I look at the first denominator, it cannot factor. The second numerator, I'm looking for numbers that add to -1 and multiply to -2. So that becomes x minus 2, x plus 1. And my second denominator is x plus 1, x minus 1. Now I reduce. I see an x minus 1 here and here, so those reduce or cancel. I see an x plus 1 here and here, so those reduce. I see an x and an x. Now I multiply across. 1 times x minus 2 times 1 is x minus 2. And on the bottom, 5 times 1 is just 5. If I look at the second example, again, the first thing I notice is it says divide. So it's keep, change, flip. I'm going to keep the first fraction as is. I'm going to change the division to multiplication, and I'm going to flip the second fraction. Now I factor. For the first numerator, I'm looking for numbers that add to -5 and multiply to 4. So x minus 4, x minus 1. The first denominator, some kids find it easier to write 3x squared as 3xx because xx is really the same thing as x squared. So this is the same as this. But they find it easier when they're reducing to have the x's written out. The second numerator does not factor, and the second denominator is the difference of two perfect squares. Once I've factored everything, I have to reduce. Here's an x minus 4, and there's an x minus 4. I'm going to get rid of one of these x's and one of those x's. I can reduce 3 and 12. And now nothing else reduces, so I'm going to multiply across. 1 times x minus 1 times 4 becomes 4x minus 1. If I look at the bottom, I have 1 times x times 1 times x minus plus 4 times 1. That just becomes x times x plus 4. You do not need to multiply that. You can leave your final answer like it's written. If I look at the next example, again, I see division here, so I'm going to think keep, change, flip. So I'm going to keep the first fraction. I'm going to change the division to multiplication, and I'm going to flip the second denominator. To factor the first numerator, I'm looking for numbers that add to -10 and multiply to 25. So it's x minus 5, x minus 5. The first denominator does not factor, so I'm just going to write it again with some parentheses. The second numerator factors as a GCF, a greatest common factor. And the second denominator, be careful, it's the difference of two squares. However, the number is in the front, so when you factor, the number has to stay in front. Now I can reduce. I have an x minus 5 and an x minus 5. That's the exact same thing. If I look at what else I see, 5 plus x and x plus 5 also reduce to 1s. Here I have a 5 minus x, and here's an x minus 5. Since they're flipped with a negative, they reduce to -1. I always put my negative on the top. So now if I multiply across the top, -1 times 1 times 5 times 1, that's -5. And if I multiply across the bottom, 1 times 1 times 1 is just 1. So you could technically write this as just -5. Please make sure you write down any questions and either email me or ask me next time you see me in class.